Arthur's face twisted with conflicting emotions. You both had your lives to live. I didn't want to hold you back. I thought that by letting you go, I was doing what was best for you. But look at you, Lila pleaded, her voice breaking. You're all alone. We shouldn't have left you like that. We should have fought for you, for us. The silence that followed was thick, charged with the weight of regret and unresolved feelings. Arthur looked away, his gaze drifting to the bustling crowd once more. You have no idea how hard it's been, he murmured. After your mother died, I thought I'd lost everything. I was just trying to keep us afloat, but it felt like I was drowning. Ethan's heart ached for his father. We know it's been tough. We've been struggling too. And now, we hear the factory is in trouble. We want to help. Arthur looked back at them, surprise evident in his eyes. Help? You want to help me after what happened? Of course we do, Lila said passionately. You're our father. We may have made a terrible choice, but that doesn't mean we don't care about you or want to see you succeed again. Arthur's expression softened, though the shadows of pain lingered. I've made my choices too, kids. You have no idea what I had to do to survive after you left. It's not as simple as it seems, but we want to understand, Ethan urged. We want to be a family again, even if it's not the way it used to be. Arthur's eyes filled with tears, and he took a deep breath, as if trying to steady himself. I tried to build something new. I thought if I could create a better life for us, maybe you'd come back. But every day without you felt like a piece of me was missing. As the weight of their shared grief hung heavy in the air, Lila stepped closer, her voice trembling. We've missed you, Dad. We've missed being together as a family. Arthur nodded slowly, his emotions threatening to spill over. I've missed you both more than you can imagine. But now, what do? I've built a different life. I'm not the same man you left behind. It doesn't matter, Ethan said, his resolve strengthening. We can figure it out together. We can start over, if you'll let us. Arthur stared at his children, the pain in his eyes giving way to a flicker of hope. Together, Lila echoed, her voice firm. In that moment, surrounded by the noise of the airport, the three of them stood at the crossroads of their past and future, the weight of their choices hanging in the balance. They were not the same people they had been 7 years ago, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could forge a new path, one that could lead them back to each other. As they stood there, the world around them continued to move, oblivious to the tiny flicker of hope igniting in their hearts. The journey ahead would be difficult, fraught with the ghosts of their shared history, but for the first time in a long while, they felt the stirrings of a new beginning. Ethan stood by the large window of his cramped New York City apartment, staring blankly at the bustling streets below. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the buildings, but he felt none of its warmth. Instead, he felt a cold weight pressing down on his chest. Art supplies lay scattered across his cluttered table, remnants of his latest project, a series of paintings that had started as a cathartic release, but had turned into a source of frustration. His brush strokes had become erratic, mirroring his tumultuous emotions. He sighed heavily, the sound barely breaking the silence of the room. I need to get it together, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. Just then, his phone buzzed on the table, interrupting the stillness. The screen illuminated with a message from Lila. Can we meet? Important news. Ethan's heart raced. The last time they had talked, they were still grappling with their decision to reach out to Arthur, their estranged father. He quickly typed, "Back, sure. Where?" And within minutes, he received the reply. "Cafe around the corner. 7 p.m. As the clock ticked closer to 7, Ethan felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. He hadn't seen Lila in weeks, and the weight of their shared past hung heavily between them. He stepped outside into the bustling streets, the cacophony of city life, contrasting sharply with the solitude he had felt in his apartment. When he arrived at the cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee surrounded him, and he quickly spotted Lila at a small table in the corner, her fingers nervously tapping on the wooden surface. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mix of determination and apprehension. "Hey," Ethan said, sliding into the seat across from her. "What's going on?" Lila took a deep breath, her eyes darting around as if searching for the right words. "It's about the factory," she said finally, her voice steady but quiet. "I just heard from a classmate that our old family business is on the brink of bankruptcy." Ethan's heart sank. "What? I thought Dad was doing okay." "He was, but I think he might be struggling more than we realized," Lila replied, her brow furrowing. "We need to help him, Ethan. We can't just sit back and watch it fail." Ethan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. "Help him? You mean help the man who left us behind? The same man who became a stranger after Mom died? I don't know if I can do that." Lila's eyes flashed with frustration. "I know it's complicated, but he's still our father. He raised us alone after Mom passed. He deserves a chance, don't you think?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their shared history. Ethan's mind raced, a whirlwind of memories flooding back the laughter, the shared meals, the overwhelming grief that had followed their mother's death. They had all been through so much together, yet they had chosen to walk away from each other when they needed each other the most. "I don't know, Lila," Ethan said, his voice low. "What if it's too late? What if he doesn't want our help?" Lila leaned forward, her expression earnest. "We can't assume that. If we reach out, maybe we can find a way to work together. We can offer to help him revive the factory. It's what he would want, and it could be a chance for us to reconnect." Ethan closed his eyes, grappling with the emotions swirling within him. He wanted to be angry, to hold on to the resentment that had built up over the years, but he couldn't deny the flicker of hope that Lila's words ignited. "What if he's moved on?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He hasn't," Lila replied, her voice firm. "I can feel it. He's still our dad. We need to try." After their discussion, Ethan left the cafe with a heaviness in his chest, but also a glimmer of determination. As he made his way back to his apartment, he thought of the years that had passed since they had left Arthur in that airport, the painful memories of their childhood, and the risks they would have to take to confront the man who had always been a part of their lives, even from a distance. The following days unfolded in a blur of preparation as Ethan and Lila discussed their plans. They envisioned a reunion that would not only include their father, but would also address the looming threat of the factory's closure. Ethan spent long hours painting, pouring his heart into each stroke, his art becoming a reflection of his emotional state. He captured their family's journey, the joy, the pain, the separation on canvas, hoping to channel that energy into something productive. Meanwhile, Lila buried herself in her studies, researching business partnerships and potential strategies to save the factory. She was determined to make her mark, not just in her academic life, but also in their family legacy. Each day was a struggle to balance her schoolwork with the emotional turmoil that came with the thought of reaching out to Arthur. One afternoon, while immersed in her research at the university library, Lila received an unexpected phone call from a fellow student, Jake. "Hey, Lila. I heard some news that might interest you regarding the furniture industry," he said, his voice enthusiastic. "What news?" she asked, intrigued. "It seems your family's factory is in trouble. I know a few people in the business who might be able to help if you're looking for options," Jake offered. "I've seen your work, and I think you could really make a difference." "Thanks, Jake. I'll definitely consider it," Lila responded, her heart racing. She realized this could be the opportunity they needed. Later that evening, she met Ethan at their favorite diner. As they sat across from each other, the clattering of dishes and the chatter of patrons faded into the background. "I spoke to someone today," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "He's willing to help us find a way to save the factory." Ethan raised his eyebrows, intrigued. "Really? How?" "He has contacts who might be interested in a partnership. If we could present a solid plan to Arthur, maybe he'd be open to it," Lila explained, her enthusiasm infectious. Ethan leaned back, considering her words. That's actually a great idea. But do you think Dad would go for it? I think he will if we approach it the right way. We just need to show him that we believe in him, Lila replied, determination etched on her face. As they talked, the weight of their past began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope. They agreed to meet with Arthur soon, ready to confront the difficult emotions that lay ahead. Days turned into weeks, and the time for their meeting with Arthur drew closer. Ethan found himself oscillating between excitement and dread. The closer they got to the day, the more he questioned whether they were making the right decision. He spent countless hours in his studio, painting furiously, trying to channel his anxiety into his art. Each brushstroke became an outlet for the emotions he struggled to articulate. Finally, the day arrived. Ethan and Lila stood outside the sleek office building that housed Arthur's new company, their hearts racing in unison. "Are you ready?" Lila asked, her voice steady yet filled with a nervous edge. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "As ready as I'll ever be." They stepped inside, the air thick with anticipation. The receptionist greeted them with a polite smile, and they were soon ushered into a conference room adorned with elegant furniture and modern decor. As they waited, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities and fears. What would Arthur say? Would he welcome them, or would he turn them away? The door swung open and Arthur entered, looking more polished than Ethan remembered. His expression was a mix of surprise and guardedness. "Ethan?" "Lila." Arthur's voice was tentative as he took in the sight of his children, now grown but still so achingly familiar. "Dad," Lila said softly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them, a tapestry woven with threads of love, loss, and regret. Ethan felt his heart pounding in his chest as he met his father's gaze. Would they be able to bridge the chasm that had formed over the years? "Why are you both here?" Arthur finally asked, his voice low. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Lila took a step forward, her resolve shining through. "We want to talk about the factory, Dad. We heard it's in trouble, and we want to help." Arthur's expression shifted from surprise to something more complex in emotion Ethan couldn't quite decipher. "You want to help?" he echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. "Yes," Lila affirmed, her voice steady. "We believe we can work together to save it. We have some ideas, and we know some people who might be able to assist." Ethan felt a rush of emotion as he watched Arthur's reaction. The man they had feared, the man they had distanced themselves from, now stood before them, vulnerable and uncertain. It was a moment of reckoning, the beginning of a possible path toward healing. As the conversation unfolded, Ethan and Lila shared their vision, their hopes for the future, and the desire to reconnect as a family. In that moment, they began to weave together the threads of their past with the possibility of the air was thick with tension as Ethan and Lila stepped into the sleek, modern office of their father, Arthur. The walls were adorned with abstract art, a stark contrast to the memories they held of their childhood home, filled with hand-painted family portraits and rustic furniture. The clatter of keyboards and the low hum of conversation faded as they entered, drawing the attention of several suited employees who looked up with curiosity. "Is he in there?" Lila whispered, glancing nervously at Ethan. Her heart raced, a mixture of fear and anticipation bubbling within her. "Yeah, just let's get this over with," Ethan replied, forcing a calm he didn't feel. He took a deep breath, straightening his back as if preparing for a battle. They walked towards a glass-walled office at the end of the hallway, where Arthur sat behind a large mahogany desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wore a tailored suit that seemed to amplify his aura of authority, a far cry from the worn flannels and jeans he used to wear while working in the old factory. Ethan's eyes darted around the room, taking in the luxurious furniture and the framed accolades that lined the walls. "Hey, Dad," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. Arthur looked up, his expression unreadable. "Lila? Ethan?" His voice was steady, but there was a slight tremor in his hands as he set down a pen. The moment hung in the air, charged with unspoken words and emotions. Ethan felt a knot forming in his stomach as he took a step forward, forcing himself to meet Arthur's gaze. "Can we talk?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Arthur nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Of course. Please sit." As they settled into the plush chairs across from him, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of being on trial. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, until Lila finally broke it. "How have you been, Dad?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes filled with worry. "Avoiding bankruptcy, mostly," Arthur replied, a hint of sarcasm lacing his words. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "What brings you here?" "I wasn't expecting a visit from you two." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "We need to talk about the factory. It's in trouble. We thought you might be able to help." Arthur's brow furrowed deeper. "Help? You mean your old factory? The one I worked so hard to keep afloat while you two were off living your lives." The accusation stung, and Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. "You're the one who left us, Dad. We had to make a choice that day at the airport, and it wasn't easy for us either." "Enough!" Lila interjected, her voice rising above the tension. "This isn't helping. We're here because we need your expertise, not to rehash the past." Arthur leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "My expertise? You mean the expertise that you both abandoned when you walked away from me 7 years ago?" Ethan felt his heart pound in his chest as he struggled to keep his emotions in check. "We were kids, Dad. We didn't know what to do. We thought you'd be okay." A flash of pain crossed Arthur's face, but he quickly masked it with anger. "Okay? I was devastated. I lost my wife, and then I lost my children. Do you have any idea what that's like?" The room fell silent, the air heavy with the weight of their shared history. Lila glanced at Ethan, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Listen, Dad," she said softly. "We're not here to blame you. We're here because we want to understand and figure this out together." Arthur's gaze softened for a split second before he hardened again, crossing his arms over his chest. "Together? You think that's possible after everything that's happened?" Ethan felt a surge of frustration. "You've done well for yourself, haven't you? We've seen the news. You're the owner of the biggest furniture company in the city now." Arthur's eyes narrowed, a flicker of pride mingling with defensiveness. "I had to rebuild my life after you two left, Ethan. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't what I wanted, but I had no choice." Lila leaned forward, her voice steady. "But at what cost? You're competing against the factory we grew up in. That's our family legacy you're stepping on." Arthur's face turned a shade darker. "It's a business, Lila. You're both old enough to understand that. It doesn't matter how we got here. What matters is survival." Ethan's heart sank as the realization hit him. "You don't care about the factory, do you? You've moved on." Arthur's expression hardened. "I had to. You two walked away from everything, and I had to find a way to survive. I can't keep looking back." Lila's voice trembled with emotion as she responded, "But we're here now. We're asking for help, not a handout. We want to save it, to save what's left of our family." Arthur looked away, his gaze falling on the window overlooking the bustling city below. The noise of life continued outside, a stark contrast to the silence that had enveloped them. "Ethan," he said after a long pause, "you have no idea what it took to get here. I had to make tough decisions every single day. I had to put my heart into building something new, something that represented my strength. And what about us?" Ethan shot back, his voice strained. "What about the family we lost in the process? You've built an empire, but at what cost? You're a stranger to us now." A flicker of hurt crossed Arthur's face, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. "I did what I had to do. If you want to talk about the factory, fine. But don't expect me to apologize for making something of myself. Ethan felt the walls closing in around him. You're right. We're not kids anymore. We've grown up, but we still care about our family and the legacy that's crumbling. We came to you because we're desperate, not because we want to fight. Lila reached out, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. Please, Dad, just hear us out. We can figure this out together. We're still family at the end of the day. Arthur's expression softened slightly as he looked at Lila, the vulnerability beneath his tough exterior momentarily breaking through. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Then let's start by talking about the factory, Ethan suggested, his voice steadier now. What's the plan? How can we help? Arthur's gaze shifted to the floor, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't want it to come to this. I always hoped you two would come back, that we could be a family again. But I had to move on. The air in the room shifted. The tension remained, but there was a glimmer of hope. Lila leaned in, her voice gentle. We're back now, Dad. We want to help you, but we need you to meet us halfway. Arthur looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and longing. Halfway? You think that's enough? Ethan nodded. It has to be. We can't change the past, but we can still shape our future. In that moment, the three of them sat in a silence that felt less like a wall and more like an opportunity. The shadows of the past loomed heavily, but the possibility of forging a new path together hung in the air, waiting to be explored. They just needed to take that first step together. Ethan and Lila stood frozen in the doorway of the sleek office, their hearts racing as they took in the sight of their father, Arthur, now transformed into a man they barely recognized. The room was filled with the polished elegance of high-end furniture and the hum of busy employees moving about. But all Ethan and Lila could see was the figure of the man who had once been their everything. The air was thick with tension, each brother and sister feeling the weight of the years spent apart, the unspoken words hanging heavily between them. Dad! Ethan's voice broke the silence, slightly wavering as he stepped forward. The moment felt surreal, as if they had stumbled into a dream where everything was distorted. Arthur turned, his expression a complex mix of surprise, resentment, and a hint of longing. Ethan? Lila? Arthur's voice was low, almost a whisper, as he searched their faces for the children he had raised. A flicker of recognition sparked in his eyes, but it was quickly masked by a hardness that had developed over the years. What are you doing here? We came to talk, Lila said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. She felt the familiar bond of sisterhood strengthen as she glanced at Ethan, who stood beside her, fists clenched at his sides. It's about the factory. We need your help. The mention of the factory seemed to ignite a fire behind Arthur's gaze. Help? You want my help? After all these years? His tone was sharp, and the bitterness hung in the air like a thick fog. You both left me behind. You made your choice. Dad, it's not like that, Ethan interjected, his voice rising defensively. Anger surged within him, mixing with the guilt that had burdened him since that fateful day in the airport. We were kids. We didn't know what to do. We thought you'd be okay. Okay? Arthur scoffed, the pain in his voice unmistakable. You think it was easy for me? I lost everything that day. Your mother, my business, and I lost you too. He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. Do you have any idea what it was like to be left alone with nothing? Lila felt her heart clench. She had always known that their departure had shattered Arthur, but hearing him voice that pain made it all the more real. We didn't want to leave you, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. We were scared. We thought it was for the best. Arthur's expression softened for a brief moment, but the vulnerability quickly faded, replaced by a steely resolve. Well, it was for the best for you, wasn't it? You both went on to live your lives while I was left to pick up the pieces. Ethan could feel the anger boiling inside him. a mix of resentment for the man who had abandoned the father he once adored and the guilt of having turned his back on Arthur. "And I guess you found a way to move on without us," he shot back, unable to contain himself. "You've built a whole new life, haven't you? A new business, a new family. Enough!" Arthur barked, the authority of his voice silencing the room. Employees paused to glance over, sensing the charged atmosphere. "You think I wanted this? You think it was easy to start over? To become the owner of your mother's biggest competitor?" His fists balled at his sides, his voice trembling with anger and grief. "I didn't want to be a rival. I wanted to be your father." The walls of the office seemed to close in around them, the enormity of the situation settling heavily on their shoulders. The siblings exchanged glances, their unsteady bond threatened by the revelations that had erupted in the space of minutes. "Dad," Lila said, her voice breaking slightly, "we're not here to fight. We need your help with the factory. It's going under, and we thought Thought what?" Arthur interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "That I would just drop everything and come running back to save you? You have no idea how hard I've worked to get this far." Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "You don't get it, do you? We're not asking for charity. We're asking for a chance to work together, to fix what's broken. We're family." "Family?" Arthur echoed, incredulously, his tone laced with derision. "Is that what you call it? You made your choice back then, and I've had to live with it. I've had to adapt to a life without you too." The bitterness in Arthur's voice cut deep, and Ethan felt the sting of tears welling in his eyes. "We didn't want to leave," he pleaded, desperation creeping into his words. "We were just kids. We thought it was the right thing to do." "Right for whom?" Arthur challenged, his gaze unwavering. "You think leaving me was right for anyone? You think I wanted to become a stranger to my own children?" The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, the three of them stood there, suspended in a moment of shared pain and unresolved hurt. Ethan felt the weight of 1,000 memories crashing over him, the laughter, the love, the promise of a family that had been shattered. "I didn't want to be a stranger," Lila finally said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to come back, but I didn't know how. I didn't know if you'd forgive us." Arthur's expression softened for a brief moment, revealing the father beneath the layers of hurt and resentment. "Forgiveness isn't easy," he replied, his voice quieter now. "But it's not just about forgiveness, it's about trust. You both left me when I needed you most, and now you expect me to just jump back into your lives." "Dad, we're not asking for that," Ethan said, his voice steadier now. "We've all made mistakes. We're asking for a chance to rebuild. We're asking you to help us save the factory because it means something to all of us." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Arthur's face, but he quickly masked it with anger. "And why should I help you? You're asking me to choose between my business and my family. What makes you think I'd choose you?" "Because you're our father," Lila said, stepping forward, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And no matter how far apart we've been, we still want to be a family. We want to try." Arthur's gaze flickered between his children, and for the first time, he seemed to waver. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crack, though the pain of the past still loomed large. "Family isn't just a word," he replied, his voice trembling. "It's a choice. It's about being there for each other, even when it's hard. And I don't know if I can trust you both again." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, and he knew they had to find a way to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. "Dad," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence, "we know we can't change the past, but we can try to shape the future. We want to work together to rebuild what we lost. Please, let's not be strangers anymore." Arthur's expression softened, and for a fleeting moment, hope flickered in his eyes. But then, the walls came crashing back down as he shook his head. "I can't just forgive and forget. Not after everything that's happened." Lila stepped in, her heart racing. "We understand that. but we're asking for a chance to show you that we care, that we want to make this right. We want to be a family again." Arthur's gaze drifted to the floor, the weight of the world resting on his shoulders. "It's not that simple," he murmured, the pain evident in his voice. "I've worked too hard to build my life. I can't just throw it away." Ethan felt a surge of frustration, but tempered it with empathy. "We're not asking you to throw anything away. We're asking you to consider a partnership, to help each other. We can find a way to make it work." Arthur looked up, searching Ethan's eyes. "And what if this partnership fails? What if you both decide to leave again?" "We won't," Lila promised, her voice firm. "We're here now, and we want to make this work. We want to be a part of your life again." The silence that followed was deafening, each of them grappling with their own feelings of fear, anger, and hope. Arthur's heart ached with the memory of the family he had lost and the possibility of a future he had long since given up on. "Maybe," he said slowly, "maybe we can talk about it. But I need to know one thing. Do you really want this? Do you truly want to fix what's broken, or are you just looking for a way out of your own struggles?" Ethan and Lila exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in unison. "We want this," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "We want to rebuild. Together." Arthur studied their faces, searching for sincerity and finding it in their eyes. "Then perhaps," he said cautiously, "we can start with a conversation. But understand, it won't be easy." Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the canvas before him. The paintbrush in his hand felt heavy, as if it were made of lead rather than wood and bristles. An assortment of paint tubes lay scattered around him, vibrant colors clashing with the dim light of the room. The sound of cars honking outside his window was a constant reminder of the bustling city he had hoped to conquer as an artist. But today, the vibrant chaos of New York felt more like a cacophony of failure. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of inadequacy that had settled in his chest like a weight. "You can do this," he muttered to himself, though the words felt hollow. He dipped the brush into a deep blue, the color of the ocean that once offered him solace, and began to stroke it across the canvas. Each movement felt forced, as if he were trying to move through molasses. The vision he had in his mind was so clear, yet the execution always fell short. "Ethan," Lila's voice called from the hallway, breaking his concentration. "Are you coming? We need to talk about the factory." With a sigh, Ethan put down the brush, the blue paint smudging against the canvas in a way that mirrored his frustration. "Yeah, I'll be right there," he shouted back, already feeling the pull of responsibility overshadowing his artistic aspirations. The reality of their family's factory teetering on the brink of collapse weighed heavily on both of them, a looming shadow that refused to dissipate. As he stepped into the living room, he found Lila pacing back and forth, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was dressed smartly for her university day, her hair tied back neatly. Yet the worry lines on her face betrayed the confidence she often wore like armor. "I just received the financial report," she said, her voice tight. "Things are worse than we thought." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "What are we going to do, Lila? We haven't spoken to Arthur in years. Do you really think he'll want to help us?" "I don't know, but we have to try," Lila insisted, stopping to meet his gaze. "If we don't reach out, we might lose everything. The factory was our home, Ethan. It was where we grew up." "Yeah, but it's also where we left things behind," he replied, his voice tinged with bitterness. "I don't know if I'm ready to face him again. Not after everything." Lila's expression softened, and she stepped closer. "I get it. I feel it too. But we can't let our past define our future. We owe it to ourselves and to Arthur to at least ask for help. He may be our last chance." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, weighing her words. The thought of confronting their father, the man who had raised them after their mother's death, filled him with conflicting emotions. What if he's moved on? What if he resents us for leaving? Then we'll figure it out together, Lila reassured him, her eyes shining with determination. "We always have. Please, let's just go and see what he says." With a reluctant nod, Ethan agreed. "Okay, we'll do it. But let's approach this carefully. I don't want to walk into a war zone." "Agreed," Lila replied, a small smile breaking through her worry. "Let's just be honest with him." As they made their way to the subway, the usual energy of the city felt muted. Ethan's mind raced with thoughts of their father. He couldn't shake the image of Arthur sitting alone in that airport 7 years ago, the pain etched into his features. The thought of seeing him again stirred up a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, anger, and an undeniable longing for connection. When they finally arrived at the sleek office building where Arthur now worked, the reality of their situation hit Ethan like a freight train. The polished glass facade reflected their anxious faces as they stepped inside. The lobby was bustling with employees in crisp suits, the air filled with the sounds of ringing phones and distant chatter. It felt foreign to Ethan, a world far removed from the warmth and chaos of their childhood home. As they rode the elevator to the top floor, silence enveloped them. Lila fidgeted with her hair, while Ethan leaned against the back wall, his heart racing. "Do you think he'll be happy to see us?" she asked, breaking the stillness. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his voice low. "I hope so, but he might just see us as a reminder of his past failures." The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, revealing a modern office decorated with high-end furniture and abstract art. Arthur stood behind a large desk, surrounded by employees who were discussing projects. He was dressed impeccably, but to Ethan, the man looked different, more hardened, perhaps a little lost beneath the surface. "Ethan?" "Lila," Arthur's voice rang out, cutting through the noise. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. "What are you doing here?" Ethan's stomach twisted. "We wanted to talk," he said, stepping forward despite the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. "It's about the factory." Arthur's brows furrowed, and he motioned for his employees to leave the room. "I see. Close the door, please," he instructed, his tone brisk. As the door clicked shut, the tension in the room escalated. Ethan could feel the weight of the years pressing down on them, an invisible barrier that seemed to separate them. Arthur's gaze shifted between the two, his expression unreadable. "What about the factory?" Arthur asked, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of tension. "It's in trouble," Lila said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "We're trying to figure out a way to save it, and we thought Thought what? That I could just swoop in and save the day." Arthur interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "You don't understand what I built since you left. Neither do you understand what we lost when we left you," Ethan shot back, the words escaping before he could hold them back. "We didn't want to leave, but you made it impossible for us to stay." Arthur's expression shifted, pain flickering across his features. "You think it was easy for me? I was left with nothing but the memory of you both. I had to find a way to survive. By becoming the owner of the largest competitor?" Lila asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "How could you do that, Dad? How could you turn your back on the family business?" "Because I had to," Arthur replied, his voice thick with frustration. "I had to provide for myself, for you both. I thought one day you would come back, and I wanted to be ready." Ethan felt his heart race as he processed his father's words. "You were ready, but we weren't. You made the choice to move on without us, and now you expect us to just accept that." Arthur's gaze hardened, and Ethan saw the flicker of anger beneath the hurt. "You think I wanted this? I lost my family. I lost my purpose. You think I didn't want to keep the factory alive? I did everything I could." Lila stepped forward, her voice softer but firm. "We're not here to blame you, Dad. We're here to ask for your help. The factory needs you. We need you." Arthur's features softened for a moment as he absorbed her words. "What do you want?" "From me?" "We were thinking about a partnership," Lila said, glancing at Ethan for support. "If we could work together, maybe we could save it. Maybe we could bring it back to life. Ethan held his breath, waiting for Arthur's response. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, each second heavy with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Finally, Arthur sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if that's possible," he admitted, his voice strained. "I built a life here and it's complicated." "Complicated doesn't mean impossible," Lila urged. "We can work through this. It's worth fighting for." Ethan felt a surge of hope surge within him. Maybe we could create something new together, something that honors our past but also looks to the future. Arthur's gaze flickered between his children, and for a moment, Ethan could see the man he once knew, the loving father who had fought to keep their family together. But that man felt buried beneath layers of hurt and anger. "I need time to think," Arthur finally said, his voice low. "This is a lot to process." "Take all the time you need," Ethan replied, his heart racing. "We'll be around." As they turned to leave, Lila squeezed Ethan's arm, a silent promise passing between them. They had taken the first step, and no matter how daunting the path ahead seemed, they were in it together. They could face the past and build a future not just for themselves but for their family, even if it meant confronting the ghosts that had haunted them for so long. Arthur sat in his sleek, modern office, the walls adorned with minimalist art that felt cold and impersonal. The city buzzed outside the tall windows, but inside, a thick silence enveloped him. He was staring at the financial reports spread across his polished mahogany desk, numbers blurring into a sea of red. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than the leather chair he occupied. It was a far cry from the days when he had filled the old factory with laughter and the smell of fresh wood, surrounded by his children, Ethan and Lila. With a deep breath, Arthur's gaze drifted to an old photograph tucked away beneath the financial statements. It was a picture of a younger him, arms around Ethan and Lila, all smiles as they stood in front of the family factory. The memories washed over him like a tidal wave: birthday parties, family dinners, and the day they lost their mother. He remembered how they had clung to him, seeking comfort, and how he had promised to always take care of them. That promise had become a burden, and now he felt like he had failed. The door swung open, and his assistant, Carla, entered, breaking the spell of nostalgia. "Mr. Miller, the staff is waiting for your address in the conference room," she said, her voice brisk yet concerned. "They're anxious about the recent setbacks." Arthur nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I'll be there in a moment." He straightened his tie and took one last look at the photo before slipping it back under the reports. He had to be strong. They were relying on him. As he walked down the corridor, the sound of muted conversations and the shuffling of papers echoed around him. The employees were his family now, each one a part of the empire he'd built from the ground up. Yet, the looming threat of bankruptcy gnawed at his insides. He pushed open the doors to the conference room, where a dozen anxious faces turned toward him. "Thank you for being here," Arthur began, sensing the weight of their expectations. "I know things have been tough lately, but I want you to understand that we're not alone in this. We will find a way to turn things around." The murmurs of uncertainty rippled through the room. Laura, a senior designer, raised her hand. "But Arthur, the competitors are gaining ground. If we don't act fast, we could lose everything." "I understand your concerns," he replied, trying to project confidence. "But I believe the path to redemption wasn't just about salvaging a business. It was also about rebuilding the bonds that had frayed over time. Would you like to take a look around?" he asked, gesturing to the familiar surroundings. "There are still some things we can salvage, and I could use your insight." "Sure," Lila replied, her enthusiasm palpable. "I'd love to see where it all began." As they walked through the factory together, Arthur felt a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to reconcile the past and build a future together. And for the first time in a long while, he dared to hope. The air in the chic, upscale restaurant was thick with tension as Ethan and Lila sat at a round table, their hearts racing as they awaited the arrival of their father, Arthur. The elegant decor, with its polished wooden accents and soft lighting, felt almost surreal compared to the emotional turmoil brewing within them. Ethan absent-mindedly traced the rim of his glass with his finger, while Lila stared at the menu, her mind elsewhere. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Ethan said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I mean, after everything." His voice trailed off, the weight of their past hanging heavily in the air. Lila looked up, her eyes reflecting a mix of apprehension and determination. "We need to talk to him, Ethan. If there's any chance of saving the factory, we have to try." She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the menu. "This could be our only shot." Ethan nodded, but doubt clouded his expression. What if he doesn't want to listen? What if he just sees us as a threat? He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest as if to shield himself from the emotional impact of their impending reunion. Before Lila could respond, Arthur appeared at the entrance of the restaurant, his presence commanding and yet frail. He wore a tailored suit that spoke of success, but the lines on his face betrayed a lifetime of struggle. As he approached, Ethan felt a surge of conflicting emotions, love, anger, and a profound sense of loss. "Ethan, Lila," Arthur greeted, his voice steady yet laced with an undercurrent of vulnerability. He pulled out a chair, the sound of it scraping against the floor echoing in the charged atmosphere. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," Lila replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We want to discuss the factory." Arthur's expression shifted slightly, the mention of the factory hanging between them like a heavy cloud. "I see. I've heard it's in trouble." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "What do you need from me?" Ethan swallowed hard. "We were hoping you could help us. We thought maybe we could work together." The words felt foreign on his tongue, a mixture of hope and trepidation. Arthur's brow furrowed, and he sat back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Work together? You mean my factory? The one you left behind?" His tone was sharp, and Ethan felt the sting of his father's words. "We didn't leave you behind, Dad." Lila cut in, her voice rising slightly. "We had to make a choice. You know that." Arthur's eyes flickered with hurt, and for a moment, silence enveloped the table. The waiter arrived to serve their drinks, the clinking of glasses a stark contrast to the emotional weight of the conversation. As the waiter departed, Arthur leaned in closer, a mix of frustration and desperation etched on his face. "I've built a business from the ground up after you both left," he said, his voice low but firm. "I had to do that to survive. You need to understand that." "Survive?" Ethan echoed, his anger bubbling to the surface. "Is that what you call it? You became our biggest rival. You chose to turn your back on the family legacy." The accusation hung in the air, thick with unresolved pain. "I didn't turn my back." Arthur shot back, his voice rising. "I had to make choices, difficult ones. I did what I thought was best for all of us." Lila interjected, her voice shaky but resolute. "But we're here now, Dad. We want to find a way to make this work. We can't keep fighting." She looked between her brother and father, her heart racing. "We need to focus on saving what's left of our family and the business." Arthur's expression softened slightly, but the walls he had built around himself were still firmly in place. "And you think partnership is the answer? You think I'll just hand over my company to you? To the children who walked away?" Ethan clenched his jaw, his frustration boiling over. "We're not asking you to hand it over. We're asking for a chance to collaborate. We can bring fresh ideas and energy to the table." Arthur sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke volumes of his inner turmoil. "You don't understand what it took for me to get here. I lost everything when you both left. I had to rebuild my life piece by piece." His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a moment, the mask of the successful businessman cracked, revealing the father who had been left behind. "Dad," Lila said softly, her heart aching for him, "we know it was hard for you. We're not here to blame you. We just want to find a way to heal. For all of us. Arthur looked at her, the pain in his eyes palpable. You think it's that easy? Just because you want to reconnect, everything will magically fall into place. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. I've spent years trying to forget the hurt, and now you want me to just open up? Ethan leaned forward, his heart racing as he sensed the vulnerability beneath Arthur's anger. Maybe we can't just forget the hurt, but we can acknowledge it. We've all lost something, but what if we could build something new together? Something that honors our past while looking toward the future. The tension in the air shifted slightly, and for the first time, Arthur seemed to consider their words. You don't know what it's like to carry that weight, he said, his voice cracking. To watch everything you built fall apart, to feel like you failed your family. Lila reached across the table, her hand gently touching Arthur's. We're not here to judge you, Dad. We want to understand. We want to be a part of this. Please let us help you. Arthur's eyes flickered between his children, the years of separation and resentment swirling in his mind. And what if I say yes? What if I agree to this partnership? Will you be able to trust me? Will you be able to see me as your father again, not just as a competitor? Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. I can't promise it will be easy, but I want to try. I want to believe that we can find common ground. I want to believe in us. Arthur's expression softened further, the walls he had built around himself beginning to crack. I've spent so long trying to protect myself from more pain, from losing you both again. I've built this life, but I've always felt something was missing. Lila squeezed his hand, her voice filled with emotion. We can be that missing piece, Dad. Let's not waste any more time fighting. Let's figure this out together. As silence enveloped the table once more, the weight of their words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Arthur looked down, his heart racing as he considered the offer laid before him. The thought of reconnecting with his children, of healing the wounds that had festered for years, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I need time to think, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is a lot for me. Ethan and Lila exchanged glances, hope flickering in their eyes. Take all the time you need, Dad, Ethan said gently. But we're here, waiting for you. We want this to work. As they sat together, each lost in their thoughts, the restaurant buzzed around them, oblivious to the profound moment unfolding at their table. For the first time in years, the possibility of healing, of rebuilding their family, felt tangible. They were on the brink of something new, something that could redefine their lives if only they could navigate the tumultuous waters of their shared past. The air in the elegantly appointed dining room was thick with tension as Ethan, Lila, and Arthur sat around the polished oak table. The soft glow of the chandelier cast shadows that danced across their faces, mirroring the emotional turmoil that brewed among them. Each sibling held their breath, the weight of unspoken words pressing heavily on their chests. It felt as if the past was sitting at the table with them, a ghost of memories both cherished and painful. Ethan broke the silence first, his voice low and hesitant. So, we've been talking about this partnership for a while now, but I'm still not sure if it's the right move for us, he said, glancing at Lila, who was fidgeting with her napkin. I mean, this is big. You've built something incredible, Dad. But, he paused, searching for the right words. But what, Ethan? Arthur leaned forward, his dark eyes searching his son's face for understanding. You think I'm trying to pull you into something that's going to fail? I've worked hard for this business. I didn't just want to be a rival. I wanted to create something that could support us all, to give you both what I couldn't when you were younger. Lila finally spoke, her voice steady but laced with frustration. It's not that simple, Dad. You're asking us to join you in something that feels like a betrayal to our roots. The old factory. It's part of our family's history. How can we just dash, she stopped, taking a breath to steady her racing heart. How can we just forget that? Arthur's expression softened, and he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. I'm not asking you to forget anything. I'm asking you to look at the reality. The old factory is struggling. You both know that. I had to make a choice to survive, and it was either sink or swim. I chose to swim. By becoming our competition, Ethan snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. Do you have any idea how it feels to see you thrive while we're left with nothing? Arthur winced, the truth of Ethan's words cutting deeper than he had anticipated. I never wanted to be your competition, Ethan. I wanted to build something that could support you both. I thought maybe one day we could work together again. Together? Lila echoed, incredulous. How could we ever work together when you're on the other side? You're not just a rival. You're our father. We're supposed to be a family. Arthur's gaze flickered to the table, the pain evident in his features. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to lose you both? Every day was a struggle without you. I poured my heart into that company, thinking maybe you'd come back and we could rebuild. But instead, I had to adapt. I had to survive. He looked up, his voice thick with emotion. I did it for you, for us. I thought you'd understand. Ethan shook his head, his emotions swirling like a storm. You think we understand? You left us no choice, Dad. We were kids. We didn't know what was happening. We just wanted a father. And now you expect us to join you, to forget how it felt to be abandoned. Abandoned? Arthur's voice rose slightly, a mix of anger and hurt. I didn't abandon you. I fought every day to keep our family name alive. I worked long hours, tried to keep the business afloat without you, and all the while, I hoped you would come back. You don't know the sacrifices I made. Lila interjected, her voice rising. But at what cost? You've built an empire on the ashes of what we once had. It's not just business to us. It's family. It's history. It's Dash. Then let's make new history. Arthur interrupted, his voice firm, but the desperation behind it was palpable. We can create something together. We can blend the best of both worlds. Your creativity, my experience. We can make it work. Ethan's brow furrowed as he considered his father's words. But what if it doesn't work? What if we end up resenting each other? What if this partnership tears us apart even more? Arthur's voice softened, and he leaned in closer, vulnerability etched across his face. Then we'll face it together. I know we've all been hurt, but I believe we can heal. I believe in us, in this family. I've always believed. Even when you were gone, I held on to that hope. Lila glanced at Ethan, her mind racing. She knew their father was trying to reach out, but the pain of their past was a heavy burden to bear. It's not just about hope, Dad. It's about trust. Can we really trust each other after everything that's happened? Arthur nodded slowly, his expression earnest. It's going to take time. I don't expect you to jump in without hesitation, but I promise you, I will do everything in my power to rebuild that trust. I want to show you that I'm not the man I was before. I've learned. I've changed. Have you, really? Ethan challenged, his voice quiet but firm. Or have you just found a way to survive? Because there's a difference. Arthur sighed, the weight of his son's words settling heavily on his shoulders. You're right. I've survived. But I'm also trying to build something better. Something I can be proud of. Something we can all be proud of. I want you to see that. Lila's heart ached at the sight of her father's vulnerability, but she still felt a wall between them, a chasm shaped by years of separation and misunderstanding. I want to believe you, Dad. I do, but it's going to take time. We can't just jump into this partnership without addressing the past. Then let's address it, Arthur said, his voice steady. Let's talk about everything. The good, the bad, the ugly. I want to hear what you both have to say. I want to understand how you feel. Ethan and Lila exchanged glances, the hesitation lingering in the air. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his tone softer this time. It's just hard, Dad. You don't know how hard it's been for both of us. We've tried to build our lives without you, and then you just show up, asking us to join forces with someone we barely recognize. I understand, Arthur replied gently. I truly do. But I'm still your father. I still love you both. And I want us to be a family again. We can make this work, but we have to be honest with each other. Lila took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Okay, let's be honest. We can start there, but we have to promise to listen to each other, no matter how painful it gets. Agreed, Ethan said, his voice steady but full of emotion. We can talk, but it might get messy. There's a lot of hurt here. That's okay, Arthur replied, his expression resolute. I'd rather face the mess than pretend everything is fine. It's time we face the truth together. As the three of them sat around the table, an unspoken understanding began to form. They were still a family, albeit a fractured one. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to mend what had been broken. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. But in that moment, a flicker of hope ignited, illuminating the darkness that had surrounded them for too long. Then let's start, Lila said, her voice steady. Let's talk about everything. Arthur nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. Yes, let's. Together. And with that, the first step toward healing began, a journey that would test their bonds but ultimately lead them to rediscover the love that had always been there, waiting to be rekindled. Ethan sat at his small kitchen table, his fingers tapping restlessly against the wood. The late afternoon sun filtered through the window, casting long shadows in the room. He stared at the blank sketchpad before him, the white page glaring back as though mocking his creative block. The echoes of his recent confrontation with Arthur loomed large in his mind, a swirl of emotions that made it hard to focus on anything but the swirling chaos of his thoughts. Ethan, are you going to just stare at that all day? Lila's voice cut through the silence, bringing him back to the present. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed and a concerned expression on her face. You need to channel this energy into something productive. Maybe you should draw. He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I don't know, Lila. I had this idea that I could create something for the old factory, something that honors our past. But after seeing Dad, He trailed off, his frustration palpable. Maybe that's exactly what you need to do, she urged, stepping into the room and pulling out a chair to sit across from him. Use this pain. Use the anger. Turn it into art. It could be your way of reconnecting with everything that's happened. Ethan looked at her, the fire in her eyes igniting a flicker of inspiration within him. You really think so? I mean, it's risky. If I do this, it means I'm putting our family history out there, and what if it doesn't turn out right? Lila leaned forward, her voice earnest. What if it does? What if it helps Dad see that we want to be part of his life again? You have a chance to create something that could bridge this gap between us. You can show him that we're not just kids who left. We're adults who care. He pondered her words, biting his lip as he weighed the possibilities. Okay, maybe I can start brainstorming ideas. I've been thinking about designing a new line of furniture that speaks to our childhood pieces that incorporate elements from the old factory, maybe even some of Mom's designs. That sounds amazing. Lila's eyes lit up. It could tell a story. You could use reclaimed materials from the factory, mix old with new. It's like a tribute to everything we've gone through. A sense of determination began to swell within him. Yeah, I can do this. I'll sketch some concepts tonight, and maybe I can even get some feedback from that gallery. They were interested in my work before all this happened. If I pitch it right, they might be on board. See? That's the spirit. Lila smiled, clearly enthusiastic about the idea. And while you work on your designs, I'll focus on my presentation. We'll both be creating something that honors our past, but also pushes us forward. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the past begin to lift, if only slightly. The thought of working on something that could potentially bring their family together excited him. It felt like the first step toward healing the rift that had formed over the years. As night fell, Ethan spread his sketches across the table, the dim light illuminating his ideas. He drew inspiration from his childhood memories, the old factory, the smell of sawdust, the sound of wood being sanded, and the laughter that used to fill their home. Each stroke of his pencil brought back vibrant images of family dinners, birthday parties, and quiet moments spent with Arthur. He envisioned a dining table that could seat a family, a coffee table that told stories, and chairs that invited conversation. Lila entered the room, her laptop perched on her hip. "How's it going?" she asked, glancing at the chaotic array of sketches. "I think I'm onto something," Ethan said, his voice filled with a newfound excitement. "I want to create a line that embodies our family legacy. I want people to feel the warmth and connection when they see it." She nodded, impressed. "That's a great vision. You're capturing the essence of what home means to us. Do you think you're ready to present it to the gallery?" "I've been thinking about it," he replied, hesitant. "But what if they don't see the value in it? What if they think it's just another furniture line?" "You won't know until you try," Lila said, sitting down next to him. "And you know what? They might be looking for something fresh, something that connection. I think there's a market for that." As they continued discussing the details and potential next steps, Ethan felt a surge of hope rising within him. He hadn't just come here to pitch an idea. He had come to reclaim a part of himself and his family. And in that moment, he realized that he was not just an artist. He was a storyteller, a bridge between the past and the future. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Lila was preparing for her own battles. She had spent the night refining her presentation, poring over her research and arguments, determined to make a strong impression on her professor. As she gathered her materials, she couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety that bubbled beneath the surface. "What if they don't take me seriously?" she whispered to herself, pacing the small living room. "What if I'm not good enough?" With a resolute breath, she straightened her back and looked at her reflection in the mirror. "You are good enough. You've worked hard for this, Lila. Just focus on the facts, stay confident, and remember your passion." As she walked to her class, she replayed "Ethan the Sun Rose" over New York City, casting a golden hue across the skyline as Lila prepared for her pivotal presentation at the university. She stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her blazer and running a nervous hand through her hair. Today was not just another day. It was a culmination of weeks of hard work and sleepless nights. As she practiced her speech, her heart raced with excitement and anxiety. The stakes felt higher than ever, not just for her academic career, but for the fragile relationship she was trying to rebuild with her brother Ethan and their father, Arthur. "Okay, Lila, you can do this," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath. Just as she was about to leave, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Ethan, asterisk, "Good luck today. Remember, you're brilliant. I'm proud of you." Asterisk, a warm smile spread across her face. The bond with her brother had grown stronger over the past few weeks, as they both navigated the complexities of their family dynamics. Arriving at the university, Lila felt the familiar rush of students bustling around her. She took a moment to soak it in the energy, the ambition, the dreams that filled the hallways. But today, she had her own dream to chase. As she entered the auditorium, her heart pounded in her chest, and she caught sight of her classmates, all eager to present their projects. She spotted her colleague, Max, who had tried to sabotage her research. He sat at the back, a smirk plastered on his face, as if he believed he would be victorious in undermining her efforts. "Good luck out there, Lila," he called mockingly as she walked past him. She felt a surge of anger but refused to let him get to her. Instead, she focused on the presentation ahead, determined to prove herself. When her turn finally came, Lila stepped onto the stage, her palms slightly sweaty, but her resolve firm. "Hello, everyone. My name is Lila," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. As she talked about her research and the innovative solutions her project proposed, she felt the audience's attention shift toward her. She spoke passionately, weaving in personal anecdotes about her family and how their struggles had inspired her work. As she concluded her presentation, the room erupted into applause. Lila beamed, feeling a rush of exhilaration wash over her. She had done it. As she stepped off the stage, she was greeted by several classmates who praised her work. "Lila, that was amazing," one of them exclaimed. "You really nailed it." "Thanks, guys." "I appreciate it," she replied, her heart swelling with pride. Just as she was savoring her moment, her phone buzzed again. It was Ethan. Asterisk, "You were incredible. I knew you could do it." Asterisk suddenly. Her joy was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the auditorium. Max was arguing with one of the professors, his face sparking in his gaze. "You want to partner with me?" After everything, Lila took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their past. "We believe that we can create something beautiful together. You've built a successful business, and Ethan has incredible artistic vision. If we can find a way to merge our strengths, we could revive the old factory." Arthur's expression softened, and he looked between his children. "You both have no idea how much that means to me. I never stopped hoping that we could come back together, and I built this company with the thought that one day you might return." Lila felt a lump in her throat. "We want to create something that honors our family's legacy. It's not just about business. It's about us." Arthur nodded, visibly moved. "I've always dreamed of having you both by my side again. I want to make this work. Let's explore this partnership. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." As the conversation unfolded, the tension began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of hope. They shared ideas, dreams, and the vision for the future, each word bringing them closer together. After hours of discussion, they finally toasted to new beginnings. "To family," Arthur said, raising his glass, his eyes glistening with emotion, "and to the future we can create together." "Cheers," Lila and Ethan replied in unison, their hearts swelling with the promise of reconciliation and redemption. As the dinner came to a close, Lila felt a sense of peace enveloping her. They had taken a monumental step toward healing, and she could finally see a path forward that intertwined their dreams. It wasn't just about reviving a business. It was about mending the bonds that had frayed over the years. As they left the restaurant, a cool breeze swept through the streets of New York, carrying with it the scent of possibility. Lila looked up at the stars twinkling in the night sky and smiled, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family.